course, there has been a lot of talk about joining NATO. Historically, for decades, NATO membership has only been supported by about 30% of the population at best, and 70% or more have opposed NATO membership, historically. And as a result, none of the big Finnish parties have openly supported NATO, historically, which under current conditions might seem strange, but it is true. The Social Democrats, the Centre Party, and all the other big parties, they've never said that they support NATO. At most, they have said that the option needs to be kept open. That's been like a favorite catchphrase, that the NATO door has to be kept open, or the NATO option has to be kept open. The coalition party did support NATO quite openly at one point, but even they largely adopted the position of not supporting it openly, just saying that the option needs to be kept open. Which basically means that these parties probably in reality always supported it, but it was such an unpopular position that they didn't want to admit it. We already saw this last year, at the end of last year, when the government was trying to increase military spending and wanted to spend 30 billion euros on new fighter jets, while at the same time they refused to give more money to healthcare. They refused to give any kind of wage increases to doctors and nurses, even though nurses are paid very poorly and they were completely burned out by the COVID pandemic. The government refused to give those causes any money. Instead, they wanted to put an insane amount of money to new fighter jets from America. And the government is still proceeding with the so-called social welfare and healthcare reform, or SOTE, which is a massive reform which basically is going to lead and has already led to privatizations of healthcare. So this, even though this government pretends to be so leftist, they are in fact supporting militarism, cutting spending on social programs, and they are proceeding with healthcare privatizations. I suppose when Finland joined the EU, there was a referendum about it. That's the way it should go usually. But in this case, the government doesn't want to do that. They are afraid that the people might vote the wrong way. So there is not going to be a referendum about NATO. They're not going to ask the people. They're just going to have the government make the decision undemocratically. And of course the whole situation has been manipulated through the media and through various kinds of coercion and scheming, like I've explained. There were a couple of polls which were intended to justify Finland's entry into NATO, because like I said, historically 70% of the population has opposed NATO membership. But now all of a sudden they claim, oh no, that's not the case, everybody supports NATO. Well, how believable is that? I mean, of course the people have been frightened, they've been lied to, they've been manipulated, but at best that could achieve a temporary shift in people's opinions. Well, there were some polls. The polls had a sample size of 1,000 people, which to me sounds small, but I read up on how statistics are made usually and how polls are made, and they claim that that is a sufficient sample size. However, everything about those polls seems sketchy. The way the questions were formed is rather leading and manipulative. The way they selected people for the polls, everything about them seems shady as hell. And those polls basically say that a very narrow majority supports NATO. 53% support NATO. And the margin of error is 2.5%. Think about that. The margin of error is almost 3%, and the support is 53%. That is sketchy as hell. That is not a conclusive proof at all. And I don't even understand what this means, but it just says that the results were modified based on age, sex, and location, based on census data. What does that mean? Then they started doing other polls because, you know, you have to understand that it seems shady as hell that there's not going to be a referendum, they're not going to put this up to a vote. Well, why not? Because they're afraid that the people would vote in the wrong way. And of course, it's actually hilarious. They basically pulled a Russiagate. They said that if there was a vote, then Russia could somehow manipulate it. Well, how exactly? In Finland, we don't even use electronic voting. We literally use paper voting. We write on paper ballots. So how exactly could Russia manipulate it? Oh, through Facebook trolls or something. Well, what are a few Facebook trolls in comparison to this massive state media apparatus, which has now been bombarding people with pro-NATO propaganda? Even the trade unions are coerced into supporting NATO now. Russian Facebook trolls don't stand a chance against a propaganda campaign like that. But yeah, they don't want to put it up to a vote. So then they started these polls which were meant to justify that it's not going to be voted on, that there's not going to be a vote. And according to this one poll by the state media, 48% say that there shouldn't be a referendum, and 41% say that there should be a referendum, and then 10% say that they don't know. Isn't that great? There's not going to be a referendum, there's only a shady poll. But no worries, to justify that, they just make another shady poll. Cool. Okay. And the president has stated that it's unnecessary to have a referendum, it's unnecessary to ask the people's opinion, and it's even unnecessary to do any more polls. The very limited polling that they've done is quite sufficient, and that it's fine that the government just decides. So the decision is going to be very undemocratic. They've just basically silenced anyone who would oppose it. I'll say a couple things about peace organizations. There's a traditional peace organization in Finland called the Committee of 100, and the Finnish government has basically tried to co-opt peace organizations as much as possible because the government has given them money. So the peace organizations can't really criticize the government all that freely since the government gives them money. So if they're too annoying and too critical, they're just gonna lose their funding. That's a problem. And I checked, and according to the state budget, the Committee of 100 has lost its funding since 2017. So since 2017, the government hasn't been giving any more funding to this peace organization because who needs peace, right? They gotta stop funding all these peace organizations and they gotta start funding war organizations because we want war and not peace. Another traditional peace organization is the Finnish Peace Committee. They also have been receiving funding from the government, but the latest data I could find was from 2015, so I'm not sure if they have lost their funding, but it's just another one of those things. So, okay, I'm about to conclude. So the latest development was that the president